You can't imagine Hillary Clinton with a headscarf, as Niall Ferguson said, going in and doing that. So this brings us to part 3, and the imperial projects of a Western unity. If we have a Western unity, then we must have get rid of the Federal Reserve. That's a corrupt institution. You need a new Federal Reserve that is linked with the ECB and has currency exchanges or links between the euro and the Amero. It might be the Amero or the dollar if Canada and the United States get together. Or we should have, in my view, a Western mark, a Westmark currency between the two sides, so that when there is surpluses in America, they can export to Europe. And when there is surpluses in Europe and deficits in America, Europe can export to America. This way, the creditors of the Western world will either be in America or Europe. Russia may be part of the Western world. It is as Quigley said, Carol Quigley said, Russia is not of the Western world, but it's not part of the Western world, but is a cousin of the Western world. And as the Russians are moved further and further north and east, and also the Slavic population is decreasing and the Mediterranean population is increasing. While within the Western world, both in America and Europe, the Nordic and Celtic population is increasing, even despite immigration from Eurasia and Africa to Europe, and in the case of America, from Hispanics, who are basically the Mayan people of South and Central America. We're also going to see emerging markets for basically Brazil in South America. And the question of whether South America is part of the Western world, I think, will be solved by Brazil bringing the Southern American Union, which will probably develop out of Brazil, and an African Central Union out of Nigeria, up to Western standards of living eventually. I would like a North African Union, a East African Union, a South African Union centred around a independent Boer republic. This would be for cultural, historical and economic reasons as well, because we have a debt to the Boers because of the horrendous things that the British did to them during the British Empire. Why should the Western world be brought together in a unity? Because the Western world will still have competition. We will have a competition between cities, between countries within the EU, which would be states of the EU, between the states of the United States and Canada, and between the EU. I don't foresee us getting rid of all the states of America or rewriting the American Constitution. The American Constitution already allows for unions with other countries or between the different states of the United States, because it says that treaties are their highest law. George Washington said that. The West has been to war with itself in Europe frequently, hundreds of times. Between the British and the Americans, we've been to war twice, 1776 and 1812. Between the Canadians and the Americans, there's been skirmishes. But the Western world as a homogeneous idea of rationalism, democracy, property, medicine and science, of a Western way of war, basically Western rationalism, Western empiricism, Western Stoic philosophy, very important. Stoic work ethic, the Protestant work ethic, all these things are very common throughout Europe and America and England. As I said before, England must be the link, because England is the maritime power that will give the maritime power to the United States, to Europe. We need to bring that huge merchant fleet of Europe and America and Britain together with a huge navy to unbottle the genie that is Germany, so it's not locked up into the European Union and simply kept down by NATO. All right, the NATO should not surely at this point not be to keep the Germans down and to keep the Russians out. The Russians are still belligerent, but they can be brought in from the cold. I'm sure about this, and that will mean that Europe and the Western world will eventually reach the Pacific and Central Asia, where the Americans have invested a large amount of money, men, and material and weapons in fighting in Afghanistan, which I think was the wrong thing to do. We should have fought and invaded Saudi Arabia. That is the only way from 9/11 to victory that you can get. You must decapitate the heads of the Saudi and Bin Laden crime families. That is how we're going to win that war. With China, we can come to some sort of arrangement, I believe, but war with China may happen. The youth of China is becoming quite belligerent, you know, and 2020 will be the time when the West is tested, because that will be the time when China overtakes the West in population briefly, because of their one-child policy. Their population will decrease rapidly within the 2050s and 2060s, when our population will be booming and coming back. And that's the time, I believe, that the Western world, an Anglophone Europe and an Anglophone America and Canada and Australia will come together under a single currency, right? But disparate governments, but a single currency, a single economic model of social democracy, with cooperating and competing governments and economies, which will excuse me, which will make the West a dynamic marketplace, a dynamic social democracy, which will make it a dynamic property owning democracy, and will make it a military superpower once more of global reach. The military side of things I will briefly talk about, because America at present has 75 million men of military age, but it uses only a fraction. It only has 1 million men and women in its army. The EU has the second biggest armed forces in the world after China in numbers. If you could bring America and the EU's army together with British training, British leadership, English and German and American arms development, with a Swedish social democracy, we would have an extremely powerful Western world with a single currency, a single culture, which would be able to outlast China. And if people at the end of this process have reached a point where the economy works so well, where technology has taken us to the point where the needs of people are satisfied, then maybe countries can then go their own way, or maybe they will stay as part of a single cohesive Western world, which I would hope so. And the model for our constitution might even be the United States Constitution, so do not be worried about that. On that subject, I've already written a constitution for England, which had good points from the American Constitution, the British Constitution, the separation between the head of state and the Chancellor or Prime Minister, and also the checks and balances from the US Constitution and from the German Constitution, especially because, given their history, we don't want a repeat of any dictatorship. We don't want dictatorship, so we're going to have checks and balances for the concept of Western world. We will have all the best things that we can get, and the most rational things. And overall, I believe that Western reason will finally